Good morning and welcome to the Clear Company and Creased Puddle webinar around managing neurodiversity throughout and beyond COVID-19. We're absolutely delighted to have so many of you join us this morning. It certainly has been a topic that has generated a lot of interest, so great that you've been able to join us, and we certainly hope that we will be able to help you and your organisations around this incredibly important area of managing those with neurodiverse conditions. First things to say are that you are able to ask questions, which we do encourage as we go through the webinar. So you should be able to see on the right hand side of your screens that you have the ability to ask questions. So please feel free to throw out your questions. We do want to make this as interactive and useful for you as possible. And the second thing is just to say that although we haven't had any problems on any of our webinars yet, we're all very conscious that we are all obviously working from home, and therefore if we do have any technology issues, please bear with us, but shouldn't be a problem, as I say. So firstly, I'll just introduce myself and the Clear Company. So my name's Jenny Hind, and I'm a director of the Clear Company, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Caroline, who's founder of Creased Puddle. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Clear Company first, and then I'll hand over to Caroline to introduce herself as well. So the Clear Company covers a whole range of diversity and inclusion services and support for organisations. I'm not going to run through all of these, and we're certainly not limited to all of these areas either, but we have been around for more than 16 years now as an organisation, working with hundreds, maybe even thousands of organisations over the years in a whole host of areas around supporting organisations around their inclusion journey. So I personally have a very personal interest in the topic of neurodiversity, which we'll be talking about today, as one of my children has a variety of neurodiverse conditions, and therefore it's something that is, a personal area of passion, as well as something from an inclusion perspective that I am passionate about organisations being able to support those with neurodiverse conditions within the workplace. So that's just a little bit about the Clear Company. Anybody who wants to know more, please feel free to reach out if you're not already fully familiar with us. And then I'm going to let Caroline introduce yourself. Over to you, Caroline.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name's Caroline Turner. My company is Creased Puddle. And if I remember, I'll explain to you why it's called Creased Puddle. I always forget. But if somebody reminds me, ask me a question later on, then perhaps I'll remember to tell you why. But yes, so we are a wraparound neurodiversity company. So organisations come to us when they want to explore their neurodiversity journey. So starting with HR support and HR training, line manager training, workplace assessments, diagnostics, one-to-one coaching, and the consulting to look at the overall strategies for those involved in the strategy for the D&I. So my own personal journey is, again, this is quite personal to me. I'm very passionate about what I do for Creased Puddle. We have a great team as well, and my staff are autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, and our associates have Tourette's, dyslexia, dyspraxia, you name it, it comes into our workplace, and we make the most of the top of that spiky profile. And hopefully I'll go on to explain a little bit more about what that means. But yes, so I started Creased Puddle 2.5 years ago. I'm a former police officer, and I'd always had, I suppose, a leg in the diversity and inclusion camp, looking at gender equality for the police. And when my son was diagnosed as being autistic when he was 8, he's now 15, my focus shifted so that I started to look at actually how we as a police service engaged with our autistic communities. The reality of that was that, as you can probably imagine, we could do better. And as I started to explore how that was a possibility, it soon became apparent that actually we were missing a trick, in that there were people within the organisation who were ADHD, autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic, etc., and really weren't disclosing in the workplace. So I suppose that started to sort of tweak my interest in why was that, and why weren't we discussing neurological conditions and differences and diagnosis within the organisation itself. So I started something called All Things Autism, which, with the support of chief officers, I grew into Neurodiversity, and it was the first in British policing. I then retired, left it all in somebody else's capable hands after 21 years as a police officer, sergeant, and qualified to inspector, and then started Creased Puddle. And essentially, it's been a journey since then. So we've grown from just me thinking, is this a thing? Is this just me going off on one and not really looking at kind of developing a business, into actually there is a huge demand for this knowledge, and being able to bring in those UK experts and specialists into the business to be able to grow it so that we can supply those services. That's me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Caroline. I think that's a really helpful overview of where we both come from. So the agenda for today then, we're going to talk to you about how the current pandemic has impacted on people with neurodiverse conditions. Then we're going to talk through workers with neurodiverse conditions who find themselves in different sets of circumstances. So those who are key workers, potentially out on the front line, those who potentially are on furlough and find themselves with a lot of time on their hands, and potentially and obviously not being able to go out and fill that time in the way that we all normally would, and then also those who are unexpectedly working from home, and what the needs of those are, of those different groups are, of people with neurodiverse conditions. And then we'll also talk about what do we as employers need to be thinking about for when this is over and we return to a new normal, which more and more is becoming evident that that's going to be a transition as well. So how do we support those with neurodiverse conditions throughout that process? So as I say, please do ask questions as we go through, and we will endeavour to answer them as we go through the webinar today. So Caroline, I'll start by just asking you the question then. So what do you think has been the impact on people with neurodiverse conditions since the pandemic started, I guess about 6-8 weeks ago in this country?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. It starts out with a caveat that everybody's different, and I think we could probably all appreciate that. And everybody is having a different experience within this scenario. I've been particularly interested in how individuals have been managing and maintaining their managing and coping strategies throughout this period, particularly in my community. So I'm ADHD as well. My daughter is dyslexic, and my husband isn't diagnosed with anything, but I'm working on dyspraxia just so we don't leave him out. So we're quite a colourful family. So it's been really a case of it started with kind of monitoring us all and how we're experiencing it, but also reaching out to the neurodivergent community to sort of to ask them, how is this impacting? Are you able to function, to work? Are you, how is it? What kind of effects is it having on your well-being? And the results of that have been really, really interesting. And I suppose it's very easy, and it would be a bit of a dangerous comment to make, to say, well, autistic people are having this experience, and ADHD people are having this experience, and dyslexic people are having this experience. That's not what we found, and we know that we actually set out knowing that that wouldn't be the case. However, there are similarities, which is kind of what's tweaked our interest into researching this a little bit further. There is a pack that I think is going to be going out with the details of the webinar, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about how that happens, the logistics of all that, of how that happens. But there are 2 case studies within that. One is my office manager, who is ADHD, autistic and dyslexic, and she is having one experience. And then there's another lady called Helen Needham. I'm sure lots of people have heard of Helen. Her alter ego, if you like, is Me Decoded. And she is an autism advocate, and she manages change within organisations for a living. So having discussions with those 2 individuals, they both share the characteristic of being autistic women, and they are having very different experiences. So in one sense, the impact for my office manager and for a number of other individuals that I've spoken to and we've been supporting is that actually really struggling with the vagueness of the information, the open-endedness, the lack of structure, every day being the same but then different, because there's always different things happening in relation to people being sick, and people needing help, and people running out of food. It's having an impact on them financially if they're not in work, and I know we're going to come on to furlough, but there's also the impact of families as well. So if you are working from home, there's real challenges around being able to concentrate and being able to produce a piece of work, be productive and efficient in that sense. On the other hand, there's a lot of people said we were made for isolation. So again, referring to those people who potentially are autistic, we were set up to be socially isolated. My friends are all online. I don't have to go into the office and interact. That I find the environment overwhelming and overstimulating, and I'm not productive as work as I am at home. Those people who are ADHD that we've spoken to, finding that actually the sameness of their day-to-day challenging, so that there's nothing to excitedly indulge themselves in to be able to make the most of what they're very good at in terms of high energy. Some are really struggling with the claustrophobia of their environment, so being stuck in small flats and being restricted to being able to go out. You are able, as a neurodivergent individual, to go out more than once a day, the government has suggested, but some people really don't feel comfortable in to do that. So it really is, everybody is different.
Absolutely, Caroline. I just echo what you've said there, and we do a lot of work with organisations around making adjustments for individuals within the workplace. Now, obviously, most people will be aware that within the Equality Act there is a requirement to make reasonable adjustments for people with disabilities, and some people with neurodiverse conditions may fall within that definition and others may not. However, at the Clear Company we always advocate for removing the word reasonable and just talking about adjustments in the context of all of the people that work within and with your organisation, in the sense that everybody is an individual and everybody will have a very, very different experience. And I think you've articulated really nicely there some examples of how people with neurodiverse conditions, even with the same condition, who've had a completely different experience of this current pandemic and how it has impacted on them. So I think the core message is really to understand what each individual needs and to make sure that that support is in place and they know how to access that support is a really important aspect of that. And what a lot of organisations are challenged with at the moment is making sure that those communication channels are open to be having that dialogue, so ensuring that managers in particularly are well equipped to have that conversation and then to put in place the adjustments that are needed to support people. So if we move on just to talk about what can be done to support key workers, there are some questions coming in as well, so I will come to some of those questions in just a moment. But if we could just start by talking about those with neurodiverse conditions who are you know, in key worker roles, that may mean that they are in quite intense frontline roles, and so, you know, what's the impact and the needs of those particular individuals. So Caroline, again, if you want to kick off with that, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, the same challenges are affecting them as they're affecting other people. However, what we are seeing again is the change element. With the change of all this has had to happen very, very quickly, very, very rapidly, and actually having time to adapt to change can be something that people who are neurodivergent find very, very challenging. So there's various drivers that have obviously that have driven this change and made it one that is has had to happen very, very quickly. And one of those drivers is fear. And unfortunately, it's not, unless you listen to the news and we trust our news reporting and we can speak to the, you know, get the statistics from the medical officer, there is a lot of ambiguity around the facts that are coming out at the moment. And unfortunately, if you can't deal in facts, and there are a lot of people who are neurodivergent that actually you know, really need the facts and want to deal in facts, and because it's also ambiguous, there is an increased fear. So we know of some, you know, key workers who are neurodivergent who are living separately from their families, which is obviously causing you know, issues around communication and maintaining support for each other and maintaining support for them as well. It's also having a financial impact, but trying to keep their families safe, and they've separated themselves off from their families in order to do that. Again, trying to manage the change and trying to manage the lack of information that's coming through, and also particularly with those that are working in hospitals at the moment, there are challenges around the PPE and being able to get the right PPE, which again is adding to the fear element and aspect as well. So I think that there are some real challenges for those people who are neurodivergent in relation to managing not just this change, right? We've changed and now we can get used to a new normal, and I'm hearing that an awful lot. But actually, the new normal, it changes from hour to hour, day to day, you know, week to week. So I don't think there's a general new normal, but it changes so often and is so rapid that actually it is managing that change that's becoming a challenge.
Absolutely, you're absolutely spot on. Again, of course, Caroline, there, I think you know, that whole reaction to change and the ambiguity that we're certainly all living with at the moment is a real challenge. I think the additional aspect that I build on there is also around the additional pressure and stress for key workers who may be working significantly longer hours than they would normally be, certainly far more intensely. You know, even if you're a key worker in, you know, in a supermarket, for example, we've all heard the stories of those who are, you know, being put under immense pressure by customers, you know, in what is you know, a quite unprecedented situation. We also know that a lot of people with neurodiverse conditions are incredibly skilled in areas of science and engineering, for example, and so we've seen a lot of organisations within that space who are, you know, under immense pressure to suddenly produce, you know, whether it be ventilators or whether it be producing new types of PPE or new technologies to help in the battle against COVID-19, or scientists who are researching you know, new potentially in the medical space, where they're researching new vaccines and ways of trying to combat this pandemic. And what I think we need to recognise with neurodiverse people is that they may have a different reaction to that level of stress and pressure than to others. The same as, you know, people with mental health conditions may have a different reaction. We need to just be very aware that that stress and pressure will be experienced differently by lots of different people, and that those with neurodiverse conditions may need, again, some additional support to cope with all of that additional pressure as well. I'm just going to read out one of the questions that's come through and just kind of interrupt our flow slightly. So there's a question here, Caroline, which asks, do you work with individuals who are not currently in employment, such as myself, who's had a late diagnosis of autism and ADHD after a burnout? So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to respond on that, Caroline, before we move on.
Yeah, absolutely. We do a lot business to business. However, we offer coaching. So yeah, that's not a problem. If somebody wants to get in touch, send us an email through to hello@creasedpuddle.co.uk. I'm sure we can sort something out. It should actually, to be fair as well, in the pack there, we set up something called Neuro Team C19, which is basically trying to bring together providers throughout the UK, and a lot of those providers are giving away and providing things for free for those who are on low income or no income in relation to coaching. So it may well be that you can find something within the pack or somebody within the pack that can also support you. And hopefully the pack will be going out after this webinar, and you'll be able to take advantage of some of the offers that are contained within that.
That's absolutely brilliant, Caroline, and I think that's something that organisations might want to think about sharing more broadly with people within their organisation, because we know that you know, some people are very open about their neurodiversity, and therefore employers may well be aware that they have people with those conditions. But we also know that a lot of people don't choose to share, and that may be for personal decisions. That may also be because they're, you know, they don't necessarily feel comfortable with their own in their environment in terms of sharing that information as well. So I think the more information and support that can be offered without making assumptions about whether people have neurodiverse conditions or not is obviously going to be really, really beneficial. So if we can move on to talk about those with neurodiverse conditions who are currently on furlough, because obviously that's a completely different set of circumstances, and we know that a lot of people are really struggling, you know, being on furlough and safe at home. I will use that terminology, and safe at home. So again, Caroline, any perspectives on how to support people in that situation?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to take you through some tips, top tips in relation to supporting those on furlough. And the first one is about giving facts as much as you can, solid evidence, black and white. What does the law say? What are the guidelines? You know, where can we go to for those policies? So it is about supplying information, but solid information. The word sometimes, and maybe particularly for those people who are autistic, perhaps is a, you know, it provides even more ambiguity. So if something's ambiguous, if the timescale is ambiguous, I suppose just make sure that you acknowledge that it is, and say, you know, we're going to review in a few weeks' time, or in 10 days' time, or 2 days' time, whatever it is. The second one is about giving somebody the whole picture as well as the details. So don't keep people in the dark. Try and supply as much information as you can. Give instant or timely feedback to people. So if they're furloughed as well, you want to be checking in with them, making sure that you know, just because it's a little bit like, you know, out of sight, out of mind, it's remote managing, all that, but you still they're still an employee, and you still have a duty to look after the well-being of that employee. So it's not about just furloughing them and they're gone, they've disappeared. It is about checking in on them and agreeing those that welfare management. It may well be that they want to put in certain contingencies themselves, which you might think are a little bit overkill, but they're trying to find some kind of solid ground in order to do that. So just give them time to adjust. If you're going to be doing your check-ins via login or via technology, if something goes wrong, there is a chance that that's going to knock them for that call. So if you normally use Zoom and then you suddenly switch to, oh, I know, let's just try Microsoft Teams halfway through the call. It may well be that the technology isn't there, that the Wi-Fi signal isn't great, and if that starts to go wrong, that can be a real challenge for individuals. I suppose it's also about making sure that and it sounds like a silly thing, but that they know who is responsible for them whilst they are on furlough. So they might get emails from the pay department, from HR, from the line manager, from, I don't know, occupational health, whatever your systems are. Can you just make sure that they know what the roles and responsibilities of those people are? Because they might never have met, particularly in larger organisations, might never have met those individuals as well. So backing up anything that you say in relation to keeping in touch, if you want to refer them to for outside support, then making sure that you back that up in an email. I've had a couple of employers that have actually sent letters and cards as well, so to back up what they've said in writing to individuals, so that that individual doesn't have to, you know, try and keep everything in their working memories whilst you're having that conversation with them, and they can refer back to it so that they can understand what everybody's part is within this scenario. But ultimately, it is about, and also while somebody's furloughed as well, one of the biggest fears that we found was that the people were saying, you know, I just know that so much stuff will have changed whilst I've been away. So one tactic that we've employed that actually somebody came up with was to keep a log of things that you're doing differently for those people who are still working, so that when you get back, you've already done your training needs analysis, and you can bring them up to speed fairly quickly because you've made a note of what's changed, and they don't have to just stumble over it when they come back to work. And that would be that.
Okay, Caroline, we do have one question actually, which I think would be really good to go through at the moment, if that's okay.
Yeah, cool.
Somebody has said, one of the things I'm finding challenging at the moment is the sense of oppression. I find the term safety blanket more helpful than lockdown. You can get hot and bothered under the blanket too and be keen for it to be lifted, although current guidance is to keep people safe rather than a punishment, as the term lockdown implies. Also, the press are far more oppressive when they have the potential to rally and motivate. What are your impressions of the impact of negativity on the neurodiverse community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it is about limiting. This is the double-edged sword of it, isn't it? So as individuals are really trying to find some solid ground in relation to what's the facts and the figures, the black and the white, trying to find solid information. But in order to do that, you've got to go online and you've got to listen to media. And we know from our research that that is having a negative impact, because how do you get that information to somebody if you don't listen to how it's being delivered? And you're right, and we're very aware of reports where the media has spoken to companies, and the company's been fairly positive and upbeat, but they've maybe said something which has sort of balanced that out a little bit, and it's maybe describing some of the challenges that they're having, and then they only talk about the challenges that company is having. So there is a huge amount of negativity, and unfortunately, if you're constantly being delivered that message and you're looking for solid information in order to feel more grounded, then absolutely it's going to have a knock-on effect. And I think changing your language, that's a really positive thing to do. So if safety, if the blanket is what you use in terms of your own terminology, in order to feel like you've got some degree of control of that, absolutely, you call it whatever you want to call it. And I think it's about you deciding how you want to go through this process, and not always listening to other people. And I mean, it's I know of one chap who wasn't going outside and clapping the NHS on a Thursday night, and he was criticised for that. But actually, he said, well, what difference does me going outside, clapping outside, make to the NHS? Really, what I have done is I've donated money to the NHS, to Captain Tom's Appeal, and I think that's probably going to have a more beneficial effect than me clapping outside my front door. So and he's chosen not to do that, and I think sometimes we're very quick to judge when somebody reacts in a certain way and handles it in their own way.
Brilliant. Thank you, Caroline. And I'm just going to be totally honest and open there, that I had a little technical glitch and couldn't unmute my microphone for some reason, but I am sorted now. So my apologies, and thanks for Nick for stepping in with one of the questions, and we will have some more questions in a few minutes. I just wanted to go back to that topic of those on furlough as well, and just to build very briefly around the fact that obviously those on furlough will have very different home circumstances. So for those who are on furlough who have caring or parental responsibilities in the home, I think the pressures are really, you know, quite high at the moment, and you know, I suspect quite a lot of us on the webinar today are parents who are trying to balance homeschooling, and whether you're working or furloughed, that is a huge challenge, and some of the pressures around that and some of the lack of clarity around that, I think, will make it really difficult for those with neurodiverse conditions. And certainly we've found in our household that having a very kind of structured approach to the day has really helped with anxiety levels and helping to manage that. So that's an aspect that employers can certainly help advise and give guidance on, and there's lots of organisations out there providing support with that at the moment as well. And then the other thing not to forget, of course, is that while people are on furlough, training is still an option, and a lot of those on furlough are really welcoming the opportunity to use this time for skills development, and so ensuring that that is available to people, again, can just help to give some focus, help to give some structure, and help people to give to kind of keep in connection with their work and what they would normally be doing at this point in time as well. So just a couple of other things to think about. So the final group of people we've talked, we wanted to talk about were those who are working from home. Caroline, is there anything kind of briefly around that population that's different from the others that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, so I think it's probably, we'll leave it to the pack to talk that goes out, but what we've talked about in the pack is environments, and we've talked about little things like making sure that you, from working from home perspective, that you just little things like you know where your best phone signal is, decluttering an environment, making sure that, you know, if you do need to do a live stream or a video call, that maybe people just jump, you know, stop live streaming Netflix when you need to do that. But I think that the pack goes through sort of a mini workplace assessment, and to look at all the different elements in relation to that, and to being able to create the best environment that you can. So I'll leave it to the pack to talk, I think, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's a lot more information in the pack that is going out, but I think, you know, again, it ultimately, you know, whichever group of workers, of employees that we're talking about here, what's important for everybody from an inclusion perspective is keeping connected, keeping those communication lines open, and then putting in interventions that support those people. And for those people with neurodiverse conditions, whether they are key workers, whether they're furloughed, or whether they're unexpectedly working from home, is to understand what's working well, what's not working so well, and having that conversation and putting that support in place. There's a comment come through which I just wanted to share as well, which is, I'm working with a client who has autism, and they like the phrase shield, and they feel that, you know, he is shielded, he shields others, and others are being shielded. Again, just that positive terminology can make quite a difference to people, and I think that's probably for all of us, but again, more so for some people with neurodiverse conditions. So the final section that we wanted to cover on the webinar today was what do we need to think about for when this is all over. So I'll kick off this time and then let Caroline add any other thoughts. So the really important thing is to understand what do people feel is going particularly well in this new set of circumstances. So what is it that this pandemic and the response to it has brought to the way that we work that we see as a real positive, and there are lots of positives out there. I am one amongst many who spend quite a lot of my time traveling, and both from a work perspective and even a social perspective, I've had so many conversations over the last month saying, why did we not do it like this before? Even though we were using technology and were doing things virtually, there was still a tendency to be getting on trains at the crack of dawn and travelling long distances or doing a regular commute. And so that's just one example of things that I think we want to be talking about with our people to understand, are these things that we want to see going forwards? And what are the other benefits that we've really felt from this whole changing period? Equally, then understanding what are the things that aren't going so well, what are the things that are particularly challenging. So for people with neurodiverse conditions, clearly the ambiguity may be more of a challenge for some people, but working from home might be seen as a real positive for some, and for others it might be something that they prefer to see, that disconnect between home and work. So again, we will find people who have very different experiences, but now is the time to gather that information, to understand what are the positives, what are the things that are not so good, and to put that in the mix so that we can together really understand what the future can look like. And what we're finding during this period is that a lot of people, a lot of employees are being more open, because we're working in a different way. There is more insight into people's home lives potentially, and that people are being more open. So as part of doing that research to understand what's going well and what's not going so well, is also asking people within that. So are there people out there who have neurodiverse conditions who perhaps haven't shared that with us before, who have already shared it through this period of change because it's had a particular impact on them, or actually feel that they would like to share it and would like to share that information with you. And so gathering that information as part of this process, again, can just equip organisations to make sure that the forward solutions are the right thing. I think it's very evident, as I said in my intro, that it's unlikely that we're going to flick a switch and suddenly, being back to normal. I don't think that's going to happen, or a new normal is a lot of the terminology at the moment, but there certainly seems to be every indication, certainly from other countries that are slightly ahead of us, that there is going to be a transition to that new normal. So making sure that that support is in place for everybody, but again, those with neurodiverse conditions who may struggle more with that ambiguity, making sure that there's clear policy decisions within organisations, real clear guidance about, do you continue to work from home or not work from home, and making those decisions to enable people to be really secure in what they are doing, I think will really help. But certainly putting all of those inputs into what a new model may look like will be really beneficial. So Caroline, I'll hand over to you to see if you've got any particular builds on that area.
Yeah, well, definitely to endorse everything that you've just said there. I think the one thing that's coming out of this is that it's thrown everybody out of their comfort zone. And when we're out of our comfort zone, that's when we learn the most. We've had to look at how we work. We've had to look at our environments. We've had to look at how we deliver. And it's made us consider alternatives that before would we have considered, or would we have just said, no, well, this is how we've always done it. And one of the pieces of work that we do when we go into organisations is to sometimes challenge some quite draconian sometimes systems and processes, to kind of say, do you actually, yeah, but do we need to do it like that? And what's the evidence to suggest that that's the best way of working? And I think what this scenario has done is it's kind of thrown everything up in the air, and hopefully we're catching those things that work the best. When the BBC, we were lucky enough to be part of the BBC World Accessibility Day last year, and they have a model which we've talked about a lot, which is being able to access a certain task in a certain environment, and that dictates the level of disability that somebody has within that scenario. And I think that's been really interesting for me within this scenario, because we've been seeing people who absolutely would not consider themselves disabled or impaired in any way, shape or form, that suddenly find themselves disabled or impaired. And for them, I suppose it's them, they've got an idea of how uncomfortable and how unsettling an environment or a task can be if you can't access it. So I think that for me, that's one of the messages that I'll be peddling out after this is, how did that feel? Yeah, right. Well, people who are neurodivergent feel that a lot. So how can we reduce that feeling of not belonging? How can we reduce that feeling of high anxiety? How can we help people to be more inclusive so that they can be more productive? And I think that there are advantages to come out of this, and certainly for those people who are neurodivergent and that are working with coaches, and there are some excellent neurodiversity coaches out there at the moment that are doing a sterling job. So here's that's my little plaque for them, and they're actually being able to practice new coping strategies. And coping strategies are an amazing way of being able to access the neurotypical world in a way, hopefully, that will mean minimum anxiety levels if they are practiced. And we see a lot of success with neurodiversity coaches. And they've been able to use some new strategies in relation to coping with managing change, for example, or working in new environments. So I think that there is an awful lot of opportunity. The challenges are out there for all to see, but it's interesting. For the first time, I think that it's been interesting for me as an observer to see neurotypical people out of their comfort zone and the neurodivergent people, some of them saying, do you know what, we've been here, we've got the t-shirt, we've been doing this a lot longer than you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've made some really brilliant points there, Caroline. So I'm just going to go to one final question, which I think is coming up quite regularly in conversations that we're certainly having in organisations. Is that as a neurodivergent person, I'm caught between two stones. Zoom calls are fine, but I don't get to fully interact with the person. But on the other side, travelling can be a nightmare for a neurodiverse person. So I don't know whether you've got any reflections on that, Caroline. I thought that was a really good point.
Yeah, so Zoom is proving quite challenging, and one of the reasons is that somebody might need the whole person to be able to try and decipher what they're meaning by what they're saying. So being able to, if they have a learned behaviour, in particular being able to read body language and coupled with tone and voice and what's said, then actually, well, something like this is potentially problematic. Because actually you just have a voice, a disembodied voice. Conference calls are also proving really challenging for those people who are neurodivergent, because actually who's saying what and actually not being able to decipher whose turn it is next, and there's always a pause, and yeah, it is proving really challenging. And you're right, travelling has got its own dinner party when it comes to challenges as travelling. I think that there are ways, and I think that technology will use this as a platform. Sorry, technology. I think that technology will use this as a platform to be able to produce better ways of us being able to engage remotely and digitally. And hopefully they'll use it as a springboard to be able to provide better ways of doing that. But yes, I acknowledge that there are absolute challenges in relation to these new ways of working, without a doubt.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. So there's one final comment, and I'm conscious there are some more questions that have come through, but I'm also conscious of time. So I'm just going to finish by sharing a comment that has been made. And for those who've asked questions, we'll come back to you directly if we've not managed to answer you during the webinar. So, but I thought this summed it up really nicely. It says, going forward, experiencing this as a neurodiverse individual also means that this could be an important opportunity to think creatively about how we want to work and live our lives. This could create an exciting and fulfilling future for those who are neurodiverse, and we must think about exciting ideas, about as many exciting ideas and solutions as possible, because it will not only help those who are neurodiverse, but many others in communities as well. And I think that's absolutely spot on, is let's take all of the positives out of this situation and come out of this with, you know, a really much more exciting and inclusive way forwards for everyone. So Yeah, absolutely. So a huge thank you to Caroline for joining us today. I think your insights have been incredibly valuable, and I can see lots of really positive comments and thank yous in the questions pane. So clearly very much appreciated by those who've joined the webinar today. As Caroline alluded to, we will be sending out a follow-up email which will include a link to the recording of this webinar, because we're conscious that you may want to share it with others within your organisation, or indeed you may wish to listen back if there were some elements that you wanted to re-listen to, and also the amazing pack that has been pulled together with contributions from all sorts of different people who have expertise in the neurodiversity space, which no doubt will provide some invaluable tools for everyone on the webinar. And then just finally to say, I can see that a large number of the organisations who've joined us today are already signed up to the Clear Company COVID-19 Inclusion Toolkit. But for those who aren't, we do have access to a technology platform which has a host of tools on it to help organisations through this period. It's all free to access. All you need to do is to drop us an email or to go onto the website and follow the link, and we will get you set up, and that is proving incredibly valuable to a lot of organisations, and that's a contribution that we've been absolutely delighted to make to support organisations through this period. So we'll wrap it up there for today. Thank you all so much for joining, and as I say, please feel free to contact either the Clear Company or Creased Puddle if there's anything more that we can do to support you with. Thank you all, and goodbye.